Chapter 3. Milly-Molly-Mandy Meets Her Great Aunt. Once upon a time, one fine evening, Milly-Molly-Mandy and her father and mother and grandpa and grandma and uncle and auntie were all sitting at supper. There was bread and butter and cheese for the grown-ups, and bread and milk for Milly-Molly-Mandy, and baked apples and cocoa for them all. When suddenly there came a loud banging on the knocker. "Run, Milly-Molly-Mandy," said Mother. "That sounds like the postman." So Milly-Molly-Mandy jumped down from her chair in a great hurry and fetched the letter, which was for Mother. Then she climbed onto her chair again, and everyone looked interested while Mother opened it. It was from someone who called Milly-Molly-Mandy's mother "Dear Polly," and was to ask if that someone might spend a few days with them, and it finished up, "Your affectionate Aunt Margaret." Father and Mother and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle and Auntie were quite pleased, and Milly-Molly-Mandy was pleased too, although she did not know who it was until Grandma said to her, "It is my sister Margaret, your great auntie, who is coming." Then Milly-Molly-Mandy was very interested indeed. "Is she my great auntie and your sister too?" she asked Grandma. "Yes, and she's my sister-in-law," said Grandpa. "And my auntie," said Mother. "And my auntie-in-law," said Father. "And my auntie-in-law too," said Auntie. "And my auntie," said Uncle. "Fancy," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "She's all that, and she's a great auntie too. I would like to see her." The next day, Milly-Molly-Mandy helped Mother make up the spare room bed. I could wish the spare room were a little bigger," said Mother, and Milly-Molly-Mandy looked around rather gravely and thought it really was rather small for a great auntie, but she went and fetched some marigolds from her own little garden and put them in a vase on the chest of drawers, for she knew there was lots of room for love, even if there was not much for great aunties. Then Milly-Molly-Mandy helped Father bring the big armchair out of the best parlor into the room where they always sat. Milly-Molly-Mandy was glad it was such a big chair. It really looked quite large enough, even for a great auntie. "That sounds like the postman." Then Mother cooked some big fruit cakes and some little seed cakes and some sponge cakes and a whole lot of other things, and Milly-Molly-Mandy, who helped to clean up the cooking bowls and spoons, supposed a great auntie must take quite a lot of feeding. As soon as ever the last bowl was scraped, Milly-Molly-Mandy ran down the road to tell little friend Susan the news. Little friend Susan was walking on the wall, but she jumped down as soon as she saw Milly-Molly-Mandy. "Oh, Susan," said Milly-Molly-Mandy, "you know my auntie?" "Yes," said little friend Susan. "Well," said Milly-Molly-Mandy, "she is just a usual auntie, but I've got a great auntie coming to stay with us." Little friend Susan, being a best friend, was just as interested as Milly-Molly-Mandy, and it was soon settled that next morning she should come and play in Milly-Molly-Mandy's garden, so that she might see great Auntie Margaret for herself. Then Milly-Molly-Mandy ran back home to dinner. After dinner, Mother and Grandma and Auntie and Milly-Molly-Mandy hurried through the washing up and tidied the cottage, while Father put the pony in the trap. And then they changed their dresses while Father drove to the station. And then Milly-Molly-Mandy, in her clean frock, kept running to the gate to see if the pony trap were in sight yet. And at last it was, and Milly-Molly-Mandy was so excited that she raced into the cottage and jumped up and down, and then she ran out to the gate again and opened it wide. The pony trotted up to the gate and stopped, and Father got down first, and then he took down great Auntie Margaret's great basket, and then he helped down great Auntie Margaret her own self. And what do you think great Auntie Margaret was like? She was a little white-haired lady in a black bonnet and dress, spotted with little mauve flowers, and she had a kind little face with pink cheeks. Milly-Molly-Mandy was so surprised It was all she could do to mind her manners and not stare. Great Auntie Margaret was soon seated in the great armchair, and instead of filling it, as Milly-Molly-Mandy had expected, why, there was heaps of room for Milly-Molly-Mandy there too. And instead of eating up all the big fruit cakes and the little seed cakes and the sponge cakes and other things, there was lots for everybody in the family, including Milly-Molly-Mandy. And as for the spare room being too small, it looked almost big, because Great Auntie Margaret was such a little lady. When Great Auntie Margaret saw the flowers on her chest of drawers, she said gently, "Why, Millicent Margaret Amanda, I believe that is your doing. Thank you, my dearie." "Oh, Great Auntie Margaret," said Milly-Molly-Mandy, reaching to kiss her again, "I do like you. Would you mind if I showed you to Susan this evening instead of making her wait till tomorrow?" Chapter 4. Milly-Molly-Mandy Goes Blackberrying. Once upon a time, Milly-Molly-Mandy found some big bright blackberries on her way home from school. There were 6 great beauties and 1 little hard one, so Milly-Molly-Mandy put the little hard one in her mouth and carried the others home on a leaf. She gave one to Father, and Father said, "Ah, that makes me think the time for blackberry puddings has come." Then she gave one to Mother and asked what it made her think of, and Mother said, "A whole row of pots of blackberry jam that I ought to have in my store cupboard." Then she gave one to Grandpa, and Grandpa said it made him think blackberry tart, and Grandma said blackberry jelly, and Uncle said stewed blackberry and apple, and Auntie said a plate of blackberries with sugar and cream. "My," thought Milly-Molly-Mandy as she threw away the empty leaf, "I must get a big basket and go blackberrying the very next Saturday, so that there can be lots of puddings and jam and tarts and jelly and stewed blackberry and apple and fresh blackberries for Farver and Mother and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle and Auntie and me. I'll ask Susan to come too." So the very next Saturday, Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan set out with big baskets to hold the blackberries, and hook sticks to pull the brambles nearer, and stout boots to keep the prickles off, and old frocks lest the thorns should catch. And they walked till they came to a place where they knew there was always a lot of blackberries, at the proper time of year, of course. Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan set out. But when they came to the place, oh dear, they saw a notice board stuck up just inside a gap in the fence. And the notice board said, as plain as anything, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan knew that meant, "You mustn't come here, because the owner doesn't want you and it's his land." Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan looked at each other very solemnly indeed. Then Milly-Molly-Mandy said, "I don't suppose anyone would see if we went in." And little friend Susan said, "I don't suppose they'd miss any of the blackberries." And Milly-Molly-Mandy said, "But it wouldn't be right." And little friend Susan shook her head very firmly. So they took up their baskets and sticks and moved away, trying not to feel hurt about it, although they had come a long way to that place. They didn't know quite what to do with themselves after that, for there seemed to be no blackberries anywhere else. So they amused themselves by walking in a dry ditch close by the fence, shuffling along in the leaves with their stout little boots that were to have kept the prickles off. And suddenly, what do you think they saw? A little ball of brown fur, just ahead of them among the grasses in the ditch. "Is it a rabbit?" whispered little friend Susan. They crept closer. "It is a rabbit," whispered Milly-Molly-Mandy. "Why doesn't it run away?" said little friend Susan, and she stroked it. The little ball of fur wriggled. Then Milly-Molly-Mandy stroked it, and it wriggled again. Then Milly-Molly-Mandy exclaimed, "I believe it's got its head stuck in a hole in the bank." And they looked, and that was just what had happened. Some earth had fallen down as Bunny was burrowing, and it couldn't get its head out again. So Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan carefully dug with their fingers and loosened the earth round about, and as soon as Bunny's head was free, he shook his ears and stared at them. Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan sat very still, and only smiled and nodded gently to show him he needn't be afraid because they loved him. And then little Bunny turned his head and ran skitter-scutter along the ditch and up the bank into the wood and was gone. "Oh," said Milly-Molly-Mandy, "we always wanted a rabbit, and now we've got one, Susan. Only we'd rather ours played in the fields with his brothers and sisters, instead of stopping in a poky hutch," said little friend Susan. "And if we'd gone trespassing, we should never have come here and found him," said Milly-Molly-Mandy. "I'd much rather have a little rabbit than a whole lot of blackberries." And when they got back to the nice white cottage with the thatched roof where Milly-Molly-Mandy lived, Father and Mother and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle and Auntie all said they would much rather have a little rabbit running about in the woods than all the finest blackberries in the world. However, the next Saturday, Milly-Molly-Mandy and little friend Susan came upon a splendid place for blackberrying without any notice board. And Milly-Molly-Mandy gathered such a basketful that there was enough to make blackberry puddings and jam and tarts and jelly, and stewed blackberry and apple, and fresh blackberries for Father and Mother and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle and Auntie, and Milly-Molly-Mandy too. And all the time a little rabbit skipped about in the woods and thought what a lovely world it was. And that's a true story.